Think about the last time you drizzled olive oil over a salad, or dipped a piece of bread into that rich, golden liquid. It's something so simple, so everyday. But 2,000 years ago, that humble bottle on your kitchen counter would have been worth its weight in gold. In ancient Rome, olive oil wasn't just a condiment. It was life itself. It lit their lamps, cleansed their bodies, flavored their food, and even anointed their emperors. It powered an entire civilization, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest senator. And the story of how the Romans made olive oil is one of the most remarkable tales of ingenuity, industry, and sheer human ambition in history. Imagine standing in the heart of the Roman Empire at its peak. Around you, the world is alive with activity, legions on the march, ships crowding harbors, forums buzzing with debate. And beneath it all, flowing through the veins of this colossal machine, is olive oil. It was more than a commodity. It was a symbol of peace, prosperity, and Roman identity. The very act of pressing olives into oil was woven into their laws, their religion, and their daily rituals. To understand how the Romans made olive oil is to understand how they saw themselves, and how they built an empire that shaped the world. Today, we're going to step back in time and walk through the entire incredible process, from the sun-drenched groves of Italy to the bustling ports, where amphorae filled with this liquid gold were shipped to every corner of the known world. We'll see how they harnessed nature, perfected machinery, and organized labor on an almost unimaginable scale. This isn't just a story about agriculture. It's a story about people, their brilliance, their determination, and the legacy they left behind, one that we still taste, quite literally, to this very day. But before a single drop of oil could be pressed, the Romans had to master the art of growing the olives themselves. And this began with a deep, almost sacred connection to the land. They understood that the quality of the oil was determined long before the harvest, in the quiet, patient work of the orchard. The ideal location was not a matter of chance, it was a science. Roman agricultural writers like Cotto and Columella were very specific. The best olive groves were planted on sunny hillsides with well-drained, stony soil. They believed rich, fertile earth actually produced inferior fruit. The tree needed to struggle a little, to stress, to force its energy into producing plump, oily olives, rather than excessive leaves and wood. This careful selection of terroir was the first critical step in creating a product that could be traded across the Mediterranean. The olive tree itself was far more than just a crop. It was a divine symbol, a gift from the goddess Minerva. She was the Roman counterpart to Athena, who, according to myth, gifted the olive tree to the city of Athens by striking the Acropolis with her spear. To the Romans, this made the tree sacred, a direct link to the divine that provided peace, wisdom, and prosperity. This reverence influenced everything. Groves were often planted on land dedicated to the gods, and the annual harvest was accompanied by prayers and offerings to ensure Minerva's blessing. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a ritual that underscored the immense economic and cultural importance of what they were doing. The fate of a family, or even an entire state, could hinge on the success of that year's olive crop. And just as a modern winemaker carefully selects grape varietals, Roman growers cultivated specific olive varieties, each prized for unique characteristics. They weren't just pressing generic olives, they were crafting blends. The Licinian olive was renowned for its high yield and reliability, the backbone of many a commercial operation. The surgeon variety was smaller but produced an exceptionally pungent, green oil, likely used for its strong flavor. And the royal olive, as its name implies, was considered the finest of all, likely reserved for the most delicate, highest quality oil, perhaps even for the tables of the elite. This sophisticated understanding of cultivars shows an agricultural society that was incredibly advanced, constantly experimenting and refining its practices to achieve the best possible product. This refinement extended to the very shaping of the trees through meticulous grafting and pruning. Farmers would carefully take a branch, or scion, from a tree known for its excellent fruit and graft it onto a hardy, established rootstock. This allowed them to clone their best trees and ensure consistent quality across an entire grove. Pruning was equally vital. Using sickles and saws, they would expertly thin the canopy, not just to control the tree's size, but to allow sunlight and air to circulate around the developing fruit. This prevented disease and ensured that the tree's energy was focused on nourishing fewer olives, making them richer and oilier. It was a hands-on, intimate process, a yearly conversation between the farmer and the tree, guided by generations of accumulated wisdom. This careful, sacred cultivation was the essential foundation upon which the entire Roman oil industry was built. Once the olives reached their peak ripeness in the late autumn, the entire rhythm of life on a Roman farm shifted to accommodate the most critical and time-sensitive event of the year, the harvest. This was not a task that could be delayed. The window of opportunity was narrow. If picked too early, the olives would yield very little oil. If left too long on the branch, they would become overripe, leading to a rancid, acidic oil that was unfit for anything but the cheapest lamp fuel. The entire economic viability of a year's labor hinged on executing this harvest with precision and care. The methods used were a fascinating blend of brute force and delicate handling, chosen based on the intended use of the olive. For the finest table olives, or for producing the highest quality, extra virgin oil, the process was incredibly hands-on. Workers would carefully hand-pick each fruit, one by one, to ensure not a single olive was bruised or damaged. This was a painstakingly slow process, but it was essential for preserving the integrity of the fruit's flesh and preventing any premature fermentation that would taint the flavor of the precious oil. For the vast majority of the crop, destined for the large-scale production of common oil, a far more efficient method was employed. Teams of harvesters, often including every available family member and hired laborer, would spread large linen nets or cloths on the ground beneath the gnarled branches of the trees. Then, using long, slender poles, they would gently but firmly beat the higher branches, raining down a shower of ripe olives onto the waiting canvases below. Others would climb into the trees themselves to reach the interior branches, shaking them or using small hand rakes to strip the fruit. The air would be filled with the rustle of leaves, the thud of falling fruit, and the constant, lively chatter of the workers, a true community effort. This communal aspect transformed the harvest from mere labor into a social and ritualistic event. It was a time of shared purpose, where the success of one family benefited the entire village. There was often a festive atmosphere, with landowners expected to provide food and drink for their workers, strengthening social bonds and ensuring a motivated workforce. The sheer scale of the operation on a large estate was staggering, requiring the coordination of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people working in unison from sunrise to sunset. Every basket filled represented not just a commodity, but security, trade goods, and the very lifeblood of the local economy, all captured in those tiny, bitter fruits. With the harvest complete and baskets overflowing with olives, the race against time truly began. The fruit, once plucked from the branch, is incredibly perishable. Any delay between the orchard and the press risked fermentation and spoilage, the sworn enemies of high-quality oil. This urgency meant the crushing mills were often the very heart of a bustling Roman farm, a place of relentless, grinding activity. The first critical step in this mechanical process was to remove the olives from their stems and leaves, a task often accomplished by pouring the harvest onto a sloping stone table where workers would gently rake the fruit, allowing the debris to be separated from the precious olives. Once cleaned, the olives were fed into the magnificent centerpiece of the operation, the crushing mill, known as either the trapetum or the mola olaria. This was not a device designed for brute force alone, but for a very specific, controlled kind of pressure. Imagine a massive, circular stone basin, often set directly into the ground with a central vertical pillar. Two huge hemispherical millstones, each weighing hundreds of pounds, were mounted on horizontal axles attached to this central post. These were not simple flat wheels. They were expertly carved with a curved surface that perfectly matched the concave curvature of the stone basin they sat in. This precision engineering created a narrow, consistent gap between the rolling stone and the stationary basin. The power to set these giants in motion came from the relentless, plodding walk of a blindfolded donkey or mule, hitched to a long beam that extended from the central pillar. As the animal trudged in an endless circle, the heavy stones rolled along the basin's trough, their immense weight and perfectly matched curves gently crushing the olives beneath them. The genius of this design lay in its specificity. The gap was wide enough to pulp the olive flesh and break apart the oil-containing cells, yet narrow enough to leave the bitter inner pits largely intact. Crushing the pits would release tannins that would make the oil unpleasantly astringent and unfit for human consumption. The Romans understood this chemistry instinctively, and their entire milling technology was designed to avoid it. The result of this slow, rhythmic crushing was a coarse, fragrant paste, a mixture of olive pulp, oil, and a small amount of vegetation water. The air in the press room would be thick with the unmistakable, grassy aroma of fresh olives, a scent that signaled the first major transformation of the fruit into something truly valuable. This paste was then gathered into tightly woven baskets, ready for the next, even more crucial stage of extraction. This meticulous separation of flesh from pit at the very beginning of the process was what set the stage for the famously high quality of fine Roman oil, a testament to their deep understanding of both agriculture and engineering. This coarse, fragrant paste, now freed from its bitter pits, held the precious liquid within its pulp, but extracting it required one more act of immense, controlled force. The next stage moved from the rhythmic grinding of the mill to the powerful, decisive action of the press. For the Romans, this was where the true magic happened, the moment they literally squeezed liquid gold from the earth. The most iconic and widely used device for this was the lever press, or prelum. Its design was a masterpiece of simple physics, harnessing leverage to generate truly astonishing pressure. Picture a massive horizontal wooden beam, as thick as a tree trunk, anchored at one end to a solid stone wall, or between two huge upright pillars. The other end of this beam hung free, suspended over a large stack of the woven baskets filled with olive paste. These baskets, made of durable esparto grass or hemp, acted as both containers and filters. They were stacked one on top of another on a large, circular stone base that had a carved channel running around its circumference, leading to a central spout. The process of pressing was a carefully orchestrated ritual. Once the stack of baskets was in place, the immense weight of the free end of the beam had to be forced downward. In the earliest and simplest versions, this was done by workers hanging from the beam or hauling down on ropes, but the Romans quickly engineered a more powerful and controlled method. They began adding enormous stone weights to the free end of the beam, sometimes weighing tons, to systematically increase the downward pressure. The groans and creaks of the straining wood and rope would have filled the press room as the weight began to tell, and the first trickles of dark, cloudy liquid would seep from the baskets, running down the grooves in the stone base and collecting at the central spout. But the real leap forward in technology came with the invention and refinement of the screw press. This was a revolutionary innovation that replaced brute strength with mechanical advantage. Instead of just adding dead weight, a large wooden screw was installed through the free end of the beam. By turning this screw with long wooden poles, workers could apply a gradual, immense, and perfectly controlled pressure, far greater than anything possible before. This allowed them to methodically squeeze every last drop of oil from the paste without the risk of sudden, violent shifts or the need for dangerously heavy counterweights. The screw press represented the height of Roman pressing technology, a tool of such efficiency that its basic principle would be used for centuries to come. The liquid that first flowed from the press wasn't pure oil. It was a murky mixture of oil, water, and fine vegetable particles. This emulsion was channeled from the press base into a series of settling vats, often carved directly into the stone floor of the facility. Here, the laws of nature took over. Because oil is lighter than water, it would slowly rise to the surface over hours or days. The workers would then carefully skim this pure, golden green oil from the top of each vat using broad, shallow ladles, transferring it into large ceramic storage jars called dolia. What remained behind was amphorae, the bitter, watery lees that were drained away and often used as a pesticide, a fertilizer, or even a primitive form of industrial cleaner for scouring greasy pottery. The solid leftover mash in the baskets, called pomace, was also put to use, sometimes being mixed with water and repressed to extract a lower-grade oil for lamps, or dried and used as a cheap fuel. Nothing from the humble olive went to waste. Now, with the oil successfully squeezed from the paste, the Romans faced their next great challenge: purification. The liquid that flowed from the press was a turbid, unappetizing mix of golden oil, bitter vegetation water, and tiny fragments of pulp and skin. To transform this murky blend into the clear, prized liquid that would fill amphorae bound for Rome itself required one more act of brilliance. And for this, they turned to a fundamental law of nature they understood perfectly: gravity. They didn't need complex chemicals or filters. They had a far more elegant and reliable solution. This final purification stage almost always took place in a specific area of the press facility dedicated to decantation. Here, the freshly pressed mixture was channeled into a series of large, deep settling vats. These were often massive ceramic jars called dolia, which were frequently partially buried in the ground to keep their contents cool and stable. The design of these containers was crucial. Their great depth and narrow openings provided a tall, quiet column of liquid, creating the ideal conditions for the separation process to occur undisturbed. And then they simply waited. For hours, sometimes even days, the mixture would sit in perfect stillness. In this calm environment, the different components, each with their own distinct weight, began to naturally partition. The heaviest elements, the water, any remaining bits of sediment, and the bitter lees known as amphorae slowly sank to the very bottom of the vat. Meanwhile, the lightest substance, the pure golden oil, gradually and triumphantly rose to the very top, forming a distinct, gleaming layer. A skilled worker could actually see these separate strata through the slightly translucent walls of the ceramic dolia, watching the transformation happen before their eyes. Once the separation was complete, the delicate task of skimming began. Using a broad, shallow ladle made of bronze or pottery, a worker would gently break the surface of the liquid, carefully scooping up only the pure oil from the topmost layer. This required an incredibly steady hand and a keen eye. A single deep dip of the ladle could easily draw up the watery impurities from below and contaminate an entire batch. This first, finest skimming produced what we would call extra virgin oil today, the most flavorful, aromatic, and valuable grade, reserved for the tables of the wealthy and for religious ceremonies. Often the decantation process was repeated, with the oil being transferred to a second, then sometimes even a third set of clean vats. Each transfer allowed for further settling and skimming, each pass resulting in a purer, more refined product. This patient multi-stage method ensured that the oil that finally made its way into storage amphorae was brilliantly clear and of the highest possible quality, a testament to Roman patience and their profound understanding of simple physical principles. But this exquisite liquid gold was utterly useless if it couldn't be transported. You can't ship prosperity in a puddle. For oil to become a true empire-wide commodity, it needed a perfect vessel, a container that was durable, stackable, sealable, and standardized. This demand gave rise to one of the ancient world's most iconic and specialized industries, amphora production. Think of these not as simple pots, but as the intermodal shipping containers of antiquity, each one meticulously designed for a single vital purpose. The journey of Roman olive oil, from a press in southern Spain to a kitchen in downtown Rome, began not in a grove, but in a smoky, intensely hot pottery workshop. These were not general-purpose potteries, making a variety of bowls and plates. Many were highly specialized factories, their entire output dedicated to producing a single type of container, the oil amphora. The most famous of these, the workhorse of the Betecan oil trade from modern-day Spain, was the Dressel 20. Named centuries later by the archaeologist Heinrich Dressel, who classified them, these amphorae were instantly recognizable by their distinct shape: a wide, rounded body, a short neck, two sturdy handles, and a most peculiar feature, a solid, pointed bottom. That pointed base seems counterintuitive at first. How do you stand up a vase with no flat bottom? But its genius was entirely functional. These amphorae weren't designed to stand upright on a shelf. They were designed to travel. The pointed base was a masterpiece of naval engineering. On a sailing ship being tossed by Mediterranean waves, a round-bottomed amphora could roll and shift, causing a catastrophic imbalance. The pointed base, however, could be easily wedged into a bed of sand in the ship's hold, or slotted securely into purpose-built wooden racks and frames, locking an entire cargo into a single, immovable mass. This same design also made them incredibly efficient to unload. Dockworkers in the port of Ostia could simply hoist them by their handles and plunge the pointed end into the soft ground of the riverbank, creating a temporary, stable storage yard of thousands of upright vessels, awaiting transfer to barges headed up the Tiber to Rome. The production of a Dressel 20 was a marvel of industrialized craftsmanship. Potters used a kicking wheel, but built these large vessels in two separate sections. They would first throw the lower, conical half of the body and set it aside to firm up slightly. Then they would throw the upper half, complete with neck and the beginnings of the handles, and skillfully weld the two leather-hard sections together, smoothing the joint until it was nearly invisible. The sturdy rope-like handles were added last, carefully pulled and shaped by hand to provide a solid grip for workers. Each amphora was then stamped, often with the name of the workshop owner or the estate that commissioned it, creating a permanent record of its origin, an ancient form of branding and quality control. Furthermore, the shape and size of an amphora weren't arbitrary. They were often a direct indicator of the quality of oil inside. While the Dressel 20 was the standard bulk container, finer oils intended for the elite might be transported in smaller, more elegantly proportioned vessels like the Dressel 6B form. which had a more slender profile and a longer neck. The container itself sent a message about its contents. Before a merchant even broke the seal, the shape of the amphora told him whether he was looking at common lamp oil or a first pressing worthy of a senator's table. This entire ecosystem, from the specialized workshop to the brilliantly designed pointed base, was the unsung hero of the Roman oil trade, the critical link that turned a local agricultural product into the fuel of an empire. Not all oil that emerged from the press was considered equal. The Romans operated a highly sophisticated and multi-tiered grading system that categorized oil based on everything from the type of fruit used and the pressing method to its final clarity and flavor. This wasn't just about quality. It was a rigid social and economic hierarchy mirrored in the oil itself. The very first oil to rise to the surface of the settling vat, a product of the gentlest pressing of only the finest, greenest olives, was the most coveted grade. The Romans called this premier product oleum ex albis ulivis oil from white olives. This name is a bit of a misdirection to our modern ears, as it almost certainly referred not to the color of the fruit, but to the brilliant pale green gold hue of the oil itself, a color they associated with purity and excellence. This was the extra virgin of its day, possessing a low acidity, a complex, fruity aroma, and a vibrant, peppery finish. It was the oil of ceremony and privilege, used to anoint priests and emperors, presented as a lavish gift, and drizzled over the most delicate dishes on the tables of the elite. Its production was a careful, deliberate process, often involving hand-picked olives, crushed and pressed on the very same day to guarantee no fermentation could begin. The next tier down was the workhorse of Roman cuisine and commerce, known as oleum virid green oil. This category represented the good, standard quality oil that would have been found in most middle-class Roman homes and used in everyday cooking. It was likely produced from a mix of ripe and green olives, perhaps from the second pressing of the same paste that yielded the ex albis ulivis, or from a more efficient, single pressing of a good quality harvest. While still perfectly fine for eating, it would have had a stronger, more robust flavor and a darker color than the premier grade. This was the oil that dressed the salads, fried the fish, and preserved the cheeses for the vast majority of Roman citizens who could afford something better than the absolute basics. It fueled not just lamps, but the daily life of the empire's bustling cities. At the bottom of this culinary ladder was oleum cibarium, roughly translated as common oil, or even slave oil. This was the lowest grade, a product of necessity rather than choice. It was made from olives that were overripe, fallen to the ground, or partially damaged, often subjected to a final, intense pressing of the leftover pomace, mixed with hot water to squeeze out every last possible drop of lipid. The result was a dark, cloudy, and fiercely acidic oil that was borderline unpalatable. Its primary use was purely functional, as fuel for the terracotta lamps that lit countless Roman homes, shops, and streets after dark. It was also a staple ration for slaves, providing them with essential fats and calories. The very name cibarium links it directly to basic sustenance, or cibus, food, but in its most fundamental and unappealing form. This strict grading system ensured that every single drop of oil, from the most exquisite to the most utilitarian, found its place and purpose, perfectly reflecting the stratified nature of Roman society itself. This entire monumental operation, from the carefully tended groves to the groaning presses, required a workforce of staggering proportions. The engine of this agricultural machine, the undeniable muscle behind the entire industry, was slavery. It is impossible to overstate the role enslaved people played. The Roman oil economy, particularly on the massive commercial estates, was built upon and utterly dependent on their labor. The scale of production we've been describing simply could not have been achieved otherwise. At the heart of this system were the vast agricultural plantations known as latifundia. These were not small family farms, but enormous, factory-like estates, often owned by absentee aristocrats in Rome and managed by a hired overseer. Their entire business model was maximizing output for trade, and this required a permanent, controlled, and cost-effective labor force. Enslaved workers provided exactly that. On a large latifundium specializing in olive oil, hundreds of enslaved individuals would have lived and worked, forming a self-contained community dedicated to a single commodity. The work was brutally segmented, with teams of enslaved laborers assigned to each specific, grueling task. The lowest rung of this hierarchy were the general field hands. These were the men, women, and even children who would spend endless days under the sun during the harvest, beating the trees with long poles, clambering through the branches, and hauling heavy baskets of olives from the groves to the pressing facility. Theirs was a life of pure, repetitive physical exertion. Their value measured only in the weight of fruit they could move. But within this oppressive system, a hierarchy of skill and value existed, much like in any other complex industry. An enslaved worker who possessed a specific, technical skill was a more valuable asset, and this was reflected in their treatment and price. The most crucial and highly specialized role was that of the ollarius, the oil maker. This was a position of immense responsibility, often held by a trusted, experienced enslaved man who had learned the craft over a lifetime. The ollarius was the master of the press room. He had to know precisely when the olives were at their peak for pressing, how long to crush them in the trapetum to avoid bitterness, how to stack the baskets in the press for optimal flow, and most importantly, the exact moment to stop applying pressure to ensure the quality of the first-grade oil. A mistake at any point could ruin an entire harvest's value. Because his expertise directly translated into profit, an ollarius was a highly prized piece of property. Roman estate records show that a skilled ollarius could be valued at several times the price of a common field hand. Other specialized roles existed throughout the process. There were enslaved arborists who understood the intricate art of grafting and pruning the trees. There were team leaders who supervised the harvest crews. There were potters enslaved on the estate itself who might craft the amphorae. Each specialty added a layer of complexity to this human machinery. This created a tragic paradox. A skilled enslaved person might be granted slightly better rations, living quarters, or a small measure of respect from the overseer, not out of humanity, but purely out of economic pragmatism. Their body was still property, but their knowledge made that property more lucrative. This system ensured that the entire process, from the first blossom on a branch to the sealed amphora ready for shipment, was powered by the forced labor of countless individuals, their lives and fates inextricably linked to the production of a substance they may have rarely been allowed to enjoy themselves. All of this monumental effort, the labor of thousands, and the output of entire provinces, was ultimately destined for one final, astonishing destination. It wasn't a palace, a temple, or a market. It was a garbage dump, but not just any garbage dump. On the outskirts of ancient Rome, near the banks of the Tiber River and the sprawling warehouses of the Emporium district, sits a hill that is not a hill at all. It is a man-made mountain of broken pottery, a sprawling testament to imperial consumption known as Monte Testaccio. The name itself is a clue. It comes from the Latin testa, meaning potsherd, and the Italian cocci, meaning fragments. This is not a natural geological formation. It is an archaeological archive built entirely from the discarded containers of the olive oil trade. The scale of this artificial mound is almost impossible to comprehend until you see it. Monte Testaccio stands over 115 feet tall and covers an area of nearly 5 acres. It is estimated to contain the shattered remains of an astonishing 53 million amphorae. Just pause for a moment and consider that number: 53 million individual vessels, each one carefully crafted, filled, shipped, emptied, and then deliberately broken and discarded in this one single location. This was not haphazard trash disposal. This was a highly organized, municipal waste management system operating on an industrial scale. The logistics of creating such a feature are mind-boggling. It represents a continuous, systematic effort spanning centuries, likely from the 1st century to the mid-3rd century AD, of hauling countless tons of ceramic debris to the same spot and methodically adding to the pile. The reason for this deliberate destruction lies in the nature of the containers themselves. An oil amphora, particularly the Dressel 20 type from Spain, was a single-use item for the Romans. Once the amphora was unsealed, and its precious contents were decanted into smaller vessels for sale in the city, the large, empty container became a problem. It was bulky, heavy, difficult to clean thoroughly, and the porous clay would have retained the smell of rancid oil, making it unsuitable for storing any other liquid, especially wine or water. Recycling wasn't a practical option either. The low-quality clay used for these mass-produced transport jars wasn't easily reworked, so the most efficient solution was to break them. But the Romans, in their characteristic style, turned this act of disposal into a feat of engineering. The process of building the mount was remarkably systematic. Workers would bring cartloads of broken amphora shards to the site. These shards were then carefully laid down in layers, often interspersed with layers of lime to neutralize the smell of the decomposing oil residues, and to help stabilize the growing mound, preventing landslides. The entire structure was deliberately engineered with terraces and retaining walls to control its growth and make it stable. Walking through the Emporium district, a Roman citizen would have seen this man-made mountain growing steadily year after year, a stark physical symbol of the city's insatiable appetite. For modern archaeologists, however, Monte Testaccio is not a mere trash heap. It is a goldmine of economic data. Each broken amphora carries a story stamped right into its handle before it was fired. These stamps act as barcodes from the ancient world, identifying the estate where the oil was produced, the potter who made the vessel, and the merchant who shipped it. Furthermore, many shards also bear painted inscriptions, known as tituli picti, added after firing. These inscriptions record incredibly detailed information: the weight of the oil the amphora held empty and full, the names of the customs officials who verified this weight at the port of export, and even the exact date of the shipment. This turns every piece of broken pottery into a tiny, fragmentary ledger entry. By meticulously cataloging these millions of fragments, historians have been able to reconstruct the intricate web of Roman trade with breathtaking clarity. They can trace how the heart of oil production shifted from Italy to North Africa, and especially to the province of Baetica in southern Spain, which came to dominate the market. They can observe the rise and fall of certain estates, track the business fortunes of specific merchant families, and even see the impact of imperial policies on the flow of goods. Most strikingly, they can calculate consumption. Based on the volume of the mountain, scholars estimate that at the height of the empire, the city of Rome was importing at least 23 million liters of olive oil every single year to sustain its massive population. That's enough to fill 9 Olympic-sized swimming pools with oil annually. Monte Testaccio is the ultimate receipt, a silent, crumbling monument that speaks volumes about the sheer scale, complexity, and bureaucratic order of the Roman machine, all built on the foundation of the humble olive. Getting all that oil from a hillside press in Spain to a market stall in Rome was arguably one of the most daunting logistical challenges the ancient world ever solved. This wasn't a simple matter of loading a few carts. It was a high-stakes, long-distance operation that had to overcome the perils of the open sea, the limitations of ancient shipping, and the sheer, staggering weight of the cargo itself. The journey began not at a port, but on a dusty Roman road. Once the amphorae were sealed and stamped, they were loaded onto ox-drawn carts for the first, slow leg of the trip. These wagons, with their solid wooden wheels, would creak and sway along the network of Roman highways, moving the precious cargo from the inland estates down to the coastal ports. The most famous of these routes in Spain was the Via Augusta, a long paved artery that ran the length of the coast, connecting the oil-producing regions of Baetica to the bustling port cities like Hispalis, modern-day Seville. Upon arrival at the dock, the amphorae entered a world of organized chaos. The port was a symphony of coordinated labor. Dockworkers, likely enslaved or hired hands, would first inspect each vessel, checking the seals and the maker's stamps. Then began the incredibly delicate and skilled task of loading the ship. A single merchant vessel, known as a corbita for its rounded, tub-like hull, could carry a truly astonishing load. Archaeological evidence from shipwrecks, such as the famous Madrègue de Jean's wreck off the coast of France, shows us that a large freighter could be packed with as many as 6,000 amphorae, all filled with oil. That's the equivalent of nearly 200,000 liters of liquid cargo. Stowing this fragile, heavy, and awkwardly shaped cargo was a science in itself. The pointed bases of the amphorae were not just for stability at sea. They were the key to the entire loading process. Stevedores would first create a stable foundation in the ships, held by laying down a bed of sand or loose brushwood. Then they would begin carefully placing the first layer of amphorae, plunging their pointed ends into this soft bedding, which locked them into place and prevented any lateral movement. Subsequent layers were then stacked, each amphora nestled securely between the shoulders of the two vessels below it. This created an interlocked, honeycomb-like structure that was incredibly resilient, turning thousands of individual, breakable pots into a single, solid mass of cargo that could withstand the rolling and pitching of a Mediterranean voyage. The entire hold was a masterpiece of spatial engineering, with every inch of available space utilized, often with smaller items like fine pottery or sacks of grain stuffed into the gaps between the amphorae. These ships themselves were the unsung heroes of the Roman economy. They were broad-beamed and relied primarily on a single large square sail, making them slow but incredibly capacious. They were not built for speed or battle. They were built for capacity and stability. A favorable wind and calm seas could see a ship make the journey from the Straits of Gibraltar to the port of Ostia, near Rome, in as little as 20 to 30 days. But the Mediterranean was, and still is, a notoriously fickle sea. Sudden storms could blow up without warning, and the autumn and winter months were especially dangerous, often bringing shipping to a complete halt. The risks were immense. A single storm could send a ship, its crew, and its entire valuable cargo to the bottom, a loss from which a merchant might never recover. Pirates were also a constant threat, lurking in coves and preying on these slow, heavy-laden vessels. To mitigate this risk, merchant ships often traveled in convoys, and by the imperial period, the Roman navy actively patrolled the sea lanes to protect the vital flow of goods. Upon finally sighting the Italian coast, the ship's captain would aim for the mouth of the Tiber River and the monumental port complex of Portus, built by the emperors Claudius and Trajan just north of Ostia. Here, the vessel would be met by a flotilla of smaller river barges. The large sea-going ship could not navigate the shallow Tiber, so the amphorae were carefully unloaded. a reverse of the meticulous process in Spain, and transferred to these flat-bottomed barges. Teams of men or mules on the riverbanks would then slowly tow these barges upstream against the current, delivering their cargo of liquid gold to the very heart of the empire, the warehouses of Rome. This entire network, from cart to ship to barge, was a seamless, state-prioritized operation, a testament to Roman engineering and organizational genius that ensured the Eternal City was never without the oil it needed to feed its people, light its nights, and maintain its way of life. Beyond its journey from grove to table, olive oil transcended its physical form to become something far more powerful, a foundational pillar of the Roman economy. In a world without complex financial instruments or digital transactions, wealth was stored in land and the tangible goods it produced, and for many of the most powerful families in the empire, their vast fortunes were measured not in chests of gold coins, but in the countless amphorae of oil aging in their storeroom. This liquid asset was so stable, so universally in demand, that it effectively became a form of currency, a bedrock of economic security that fueled both private ambition and state machinery. Think of a senatorial family owning massive estates, or latifundia, across North Africa. The annual harvest from their thousands of olive trees represented a colossal, predictable influx of value. While some of this oil would be sold on the open market for coin to pay for luxuries or political campaigns, a significant portion was held in reserve. A well-stored amphora of fine oil did not spoil quickly. In fact, like a fine wine, its value could even increase with a brief period of aging, which mellowed its flavor. This meant that these underground storage vaults, filled with row upon row of sealed ceramic jars, were essentially the Roman equivalent of a bank vault. The oil within was a hedge against bad harvests, a guarantee for loans, and a physical manifestation of the family's enduring power and stability. Their wealth was quite literally liquid, a constant, tangible presence that could be tapped into whenever needed. This system extended far beyond private fortunes and into the very workings of the state. The Roman government itself recognized the supreme value of this commodity, to the point that it often accepted olive oil as payment for taxes, particularly in the major oil-producing provinces. For a small farmer or a large estate owner in Baetica, Spain, it was frequently more practical to settle their tax obligation with the government by delivering a certain quantity of oil, rather than struggling to acquire the necessary coinage. This practice was known as annona, a tax-in-kind system that was crucial for feeding and supplying the city of Rome and its massive military frontier armies. The state then became the largest distributor of this collected oil. A portion was directly allocated to the two institutions that required the most reliable and massive supply chains, the city of Rome itself and the legions. The citizens of Rome, especially those receiving the grain dole, also came to expect regular distributions of oil, a policy that helped keep the urban population content and prevent unrest. Meanwhile, a legionary fort on the cold, rainy frontier of Britannia required a staggering amount of oil for its daily operations, for cooking, for lighting the barracks and watchtowers through long winter nights, and as a key part of the soldiers' rations. Supplying these remote outposts with thousands of amphorae of oil was a logistical nightmare that was only possible because the state had collected the tax in this very form. The army, in effect, ran on olive oil. This created a powerful economic feedback loop. The state's demand for tax oil guaranteed a stable market for producers, encouraging further investment in olive cultivation. The more oil an estate could produce, the more it could satisfy its tax burdens and have leftover surplus to sell for pure profit. This drove the expansion of the latifundia and the intensification of slave-based production we discussed earlier. The entire system, from the enslaved worker pruning a tree to the senator reviewing his accounts, was inextricably linked by the flow of this one miraculous substance. Making olive oil far more than just food, it was a primary fuel for the economic engine of the ancient world. But the influence of olive oil extended far beyond the kitchen and the economy, deeply penetrating the world of Roman medicine. For a civilization without modern pharmaceuticals, physicians relied on the natural world for their remedies, and olive oil stood as one of their most versatile and trusted tools. In the hands of a skilled doctor like Galen, the most famous physician of the Roman Empire, this common substance was transformed into a powerful therapeutic agent, prescribed for a stunning array of ailments. The practice of medicine in ancient Rome was a complex blend of observed science, traditional wisdom, and philosophical theory. And olive oil featured prominently in all three schools of thought, serving as a vehicle for healing, a treatment in its own right, and a fundamental component of the physician's art. Galen, who served Emperor Marcus Aurelius, left behind extensive writings that detail his meticulous methods, and his use of olive oil was both sophisticated and systematic. He recognized its inherent properties, categorizing oils by their age, quality, and specific effects on the body. Fresh, green oil from the first pressing was considered the most potent and beneficial, while older, rancid oil was seen as fit only for external use or lamp fuel. For wound care, a constant concern in a world of manual labor and warfare, olive oil was a first-line defense. Galen and his contemporaries understood its ability to cleanse. They would wash wounds with warm oil to flush out dirt and debris, creating a barrier that protected the injured tissue from the air and from further contamination. While we now know that oil can trap bacteria, the Romans observed that wounds treated this way often fared better, likely because the oil's coating effect prevented the wound from drying out and created a protective seal, allowing the body's own healing processes to work more effectively beneath it. The skin was another major area of treatment. Romans of all classes battled skin conditions, from the dry, cracked hands of laborers and soldiers to the rashes and irritations caused by sun, dust, and the harsh alkaline soaps of the time. Olive oil was the ancient world's ultimate moisturizer and emollient. Physicians prescribed it for eczema, psoriasis, and general dryness, often infusing it with herbs like chamomile or rose to enhance its soothing properties. It was the base for countless salves and unguents. A doctor would create a custom treatment by crushing medicinal herbs, roots, or flowers, like lavender for relaxation or sage for its astringent qualities, and then steeping them in warm oil for days or even weeks. This process, called enfleurage, allowed the fat-soluble active compounds in the plants to be extracted into the oil, creating a potent medicated balm that could be applied to soothe inflammation, relieve pain, or treat infections. Perhaps one of the most surprising uses was internal. Roman doctors held a complex view of bodily humors and believed in balancing internal moisture and heat. Olive oil, with its smooth, lubricating quality, was a key remedy for a range of digestive complaints. A small dose of fine oil was commonly prescribed to relieve constipation, acting as a gentle laxative by coating the intestines and facilitating the passage of waste. Conversely, for patients suffering from ulcers, or what they described as an overheated stomach, oil was believed to cool and soothe the inflamed digestive tract. It was also a common vehicle for more powerful, and often unpleasant tasting, medicines. Grinding a bitter root or a potent mineral into a powder and mixing it with a spoonful of honey and oil was a standard way to make a remedy palatable enough for a patient to actually swallow, ensuring the active ingredient made its way into the system. In this way, olive oil functioned almost exactly as the syrup or gelatin capsule does in modern medicine, a delivery system for healing. This multifaceted application, from the battlefield to the pharmacy, reveals a profound empirical understanding of olive oil's properties, making it an indispensable instrument in the Roman quest for health and well-being. Of course, the culinary applications of olive oil in Rome were as varied and essential as the substance itself, weaving their way into nearly every aspect of food preparation and preservation. To simply say the Romans cooked with oil is a dramatic understatement. It was the foundation upon which their entire cuisine was built, a versatile medium that transformed raw ingredients into sustenance, flavor, and security. In a world without refrigeration or modern preservatives, olive oil was one of the most powerful tools a Roman cook had at their disposal, and they employed it with remarkable ingenuity. The most straightforward use was naturally in cooking itself. The Roman kitchen or culina would have constantly smelled of heating oil. Frying was a common and beloved technique. They would heat oil in a shallow bronze or earthen ware pan called a patella, and sizzle everything from small fish to fritters made of chopped vegetables or meat blended with spelt flour. Baking, too, relied heavily on oil. Instead of using butter or lard as a fat in dough, Roman bakers would enrich their breads by kneading olive oil directly into the mixture, resulting in a softer, more flavorful crumb that stayed moist for longer. It was also brushed over loaves before baking to give them a beautiful, golden brown crust. Even a simple pot of legumes, lentils, chickpeas, or fava beans, which were a staple for the lower classes, would almost always be finished with a generous glug of oil after cooking, adding crucial calories and richness to an otherwise humble meal. But the role of oil extended far beyond the heat of the stove. Its most vital function was as a preservative, a method of capturing the bounty of summer to last through the barren winter months. The Romans were masters of this art, and olive oil was their primary sealing agent. They would pack vegetables like mushrooms, asparagus, and especially olives themselves into large jars, then completely submerge them in oil. This created an airtight seal that prevented the growth of bacteria and mold, locking in flavor and freshness for months. Cheeses were treated the same way. Small, fresh cheeses would be buried in jars of oil, which not only preserved them, but also infused them with a subtle, fruity flavor. Even more delicate foods, like fresh fish or shellfish, could be preserved for a short time by this method, though they were often first salted or smoked. In an age of seasonal scarcity, a well-stocked pantry filled with oil-preserved goods meant the difference between nourishment and hunger, making olive oil a direct contributor to survival. When it came to flavor, olive oil was less an ingredient and more a final, essential flourish, the punctuation mark at the end of a dish. Roman cooking prized a balance of flavors, sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, and oil was the medium that brought them all together harmoniously. Their most iconic dressing was garum, a powerful fermented fish sauce that was the Roman equivalent of soy sauce or Worcestershire sauce. But garum on its own was intensely salty and pungent. It was almost always cut with olive oil, and often vinegar and honey, to create a versatile condiment that could be drizzled over practically anything. A simple salad of fresh greens, known as holus, would be dressed with nothing more than a drizzle of oil, a sprinkle of salt, and a dash of vinegar. This combination of oil and acid is, of course, the very foundation of vinaigrettes to this day, a direct culinary legacy from the Roman table. Perhaps no recipe better exemplifies the everyday, intimate relationship Romans had with olive oil than mortem, a rustic herb and cheese spread that was the ancient world's answer to pesto, or a fine herb cheese. A poem from the Appendix Virgiliana gives us a beautifully detailed account of a poor farmer preparing his mortem for his daily bread. The process begins with him gathering his ingredients: garlic, parsley, rue, coriander, and a large chunk of salty cheese. He first crushes the garlic and herbs in a mortar with a pestle, grinding them into a coarse paste. Then he adds the cheese, continuing to pound and mix. And now comes the crucial moment. He slowly begins to drizzle in olive oil. Drop by drop, he works the oil into the mixture, watching as it transforms the dry, crumbly mass into a smooth, cohesive, and spreadable paste. The oil binds the sharpness of the garlic, the bitterness of the herbs, and the saltiness of the cheese into a single, powerfully flavorful concoction. He then scrapes it out onto a piece of flatbread, and his simple meal is complete. This scene wasn't from a lavish banquet. It was the food of the common man. It shows us that regardless of social class, olive oil was the indispensable thread woven through the fabric of Roman daily life, the common denominator between the emperor's table and the farmer's humble lunch. This deep, sacred connection to the olive tree and its oil naturally extended far beyond the farm and into the very heart of Roman spiritual life. To the Romans, olive oil was not merely a product of the earth. It was a substance imbued with a divine essence, a physical conduit to the gods themselves. Its most profound ritual application was in the act of anointing, a practice so ancient and widespread that it touched every major milestone of human existence, from birth to death and into the afterlife. Within the cool marble halls of a Roman temple, the air would often be thick with the rich, smoky scent of burning olive oil. It was one of the most fundamental and valued offerings a devotee could make to a deity. Worshippers would bring small, decorated glass or pottery vessels called unguentaria, filled with the finest quality oil, and pour them out as a libation at the base of a god's statue. More commonly, the oil was used to fuel the perpetual flame that burned in a lamp before the sacred image. This was not just practical illumination, it was a powerful symbol. The constant flickering flame, fed by pure olive oil, represented the unwavering presence of the god, a beacon of divine attention and favor that must never be extinguished. The very act of donating oil for this purpose was a pious deed, a way for a citizen to directly participate in the upkeep of the divine order and seek blessing for themselves and their family. But the use of oil went even further. In a ritual known as the lectistoneum, the statues of the gods were not merely distant icons. They were treated as honored guests. During times of crisis or major festivals, these sacred figures would be taken down from their pedestals and placed reclining on luxurious couches, as if they were attending a grand banquet. As part of this intimate ceremony, priests would carefully anoint the statue's limbs with fragrant, high-grade olive oil. This act of anointing was a form of respectful grooming and purification, preparing the divine form to receive offerings of food and wine. It was a tactile, intimate connection between the human and the divine, with the oil serving as the medium of that sacred interaction, smoothing the boundary between mortal and immortal. This symbolism of purification and divine favor made olive oil absolutely essential in funeral rites, where it guided the soul from one world to the next. It was customary to anoint the body of the deceased with oil before laying it to rest. This practice served a dual purpose. On a practical level, the oil's pleasant fragrance would help mask the odors of decomposition during the often public viewing period. But on a spiritual level, it was a final act of cleansing and preparation. The anointing purified the body, releasing the soul from the impurities of its earthly vessel, and making it acceptable for presentation to the gods of the underworld. It was a ritual of transition, smoothing the passage into the afterlife. This belief in oil's protective power in death is vividly illustrated by a common find in Roman graves, a small, long-necked pottery bottle called a balsamarium. These were not grand offerings but personal, poignant items. They were often found clutched in the hand of the deceased or placed carefully beside them, and they almost certainly contained a supply of perfumed olive oil. This was a final provision for the soul's journey, a small vial of sacred liquid to anoint themselves with in the afterlife, ensuring they arrived pure and presentable in the realm of the dead. In this way, a simple bottle of oil became a powerful token of eternal life, a final, fragrant comfort linking the world of the living to the mysteries that lay beyond. This sacred and practical liquid also found its way into the most personal aspects of Roman life, serving as the cornerstone of their entire hygiene and beauty regimen. In a world without modern soaps, shampoos, and lotions, olive oil was the ultimate multi-purpose product, a veritable pharmacy in a bottle that cleansed, moisturized, and beautified from head to toe. Its most famous and widespread use was at the public baths, the social hubs of every Roman city. A trip to the Thermae was about far more than just getting clean. It was a lengthy social ritual, and olive oil was the essential ingredient from start to finish. Upon entering the bath complex, a Roman would first make their way to the warm room, the tepidarium. Here, after their body had been gently warmed, they would begin the cleansing process not with water, but with oil. They would pour generous amounts of olive oil directly onto their skin, massaging it in thoroughly to coat their entire body. This was not the fine, first-press oil reserved for eating. This was a more common grade, sometimes scented with cheap perfumes or left plain. After being coated in oil, they would then move into the hot room, the caldarium, to sit and sweat in the intense, moist heat. The oil acted as a powerful solvent, mixing with the sweat and dirt on their skin and forming a greasy emulsion that trapped the grime and loosened it from their pores. Then came the instrument that defines this entire ritual, the strigil. This was a curved, hook-shaped tool, usually made of bronze or iron, with a dull edge designed for scraping, not cutting. The bather, or more often a personal slave if they were wealthy enough, would use this implement to meticulously scrape every inch of the body. The strigil would be drawn firmly across the limbs and torso, peeling away the layer of oil, along with all the accumulated sweat, dead skin, and filth of the city. The resulting mixture would be wiped from the blade and collected in a small basin. It's a process that might seem strange or even unhygienic to us today, but for the Romans, it was the height of cleanliness and a wonderfully effective exfoliation. The final act was a plunge into the cool pool of the frigidarium to rinse away any remaining residue, leaving the skin remarkably clean, smooth, and moisturized. This entire oil and scrape method was a brilliant adaptation, using oil's ability to bind with grease and dirt in a way that water alone simply could not achieve. Beyond the bathhouse, olive oil was a Roman's daily moisturizer and protectant. In a climate that could be both hot and dry, and with exposure to sun and wind being a constant part of life, keeping skin supple was a real challenge. Both men and women would apply oil after bathing to lock in moisture and prevent their skin from becoming dry and cracked. For soldiers on campaign, guarding remote frontiers like Hadrian's Wall in the damp cold of Britannia, a regular application of oil was a crucial defense against the painful skin condition known as dermatitis, keeping their skin protected from the elements. Athletes training in the gymnasium would also coat themselves in oil before exercising, both to protect their skin from the sun and dust and to highlight the definition of their muscles. Much like modern bodybuilders use oil before a competition. In the realm of beauty, Roman women, and some men, employed olive oil as the base for an entire array of cosmetics and hair treatments. It was the essential carrier for perfumes. Since alcohol-based perfumes had not yet been invented, fragrant essences were extracted from flowers, herbs, and spices by steeping them in warm oil. A woman would create her signature scent by infusing oil with rose petals, saffron, or myrrh, then dabbing the fragrant oil onto her wrists, neck, and behind her ears. This same principle applied to makeup. Pigments for eyeshadow or blush, made from minerals like malachite for green or ochre for red, could not be applied as a dry powder. Instead, they were carefully mixed with a drop of oil to create a creamy paste that could be smoothly applied to the skin. Hair care was another major application. Olive oil served as a deep conditioning treatment to combat dry, brittle hair and tame unruly curls. A person would warm the oil and work it through their hair and scalp, leaving it to soak in before washing it out with a mixture of water and abrasive clay or ashes, which acted as a primitive shampoo to strip away the grease. For those wishing to maintain a fashionable hairstyle, a small amount of pomade made from thicker, pomace oil was used to hold curls and waves in place. From the public spectacle of the baths to the most private moments out of vanity, olive oil was the indispensable, all-natural product that kept Roman society not only functioning, but also looking and feeling its very best. Yet for all its roles in the kitchen, the bathhouse, and the temple, the single greatest volume of olive oil produced in the Roman Empire was destined for a purpose that required no flavor, no fragrance, and no refinement. It was simply burn. The vast majority of this liquid gold, particularly the lowest grade oleum cibarium, served as the petroleum of the ancient world, the indispensable fuel that pushed back the darkness and allowed Roman civilization to extend its activities long after the sun had set. To keep the empire illuminated was a logistical undertaking of staggering proportions, a constant, hungry demand that drove the entire industry. Consider the sheer scale of the need. Every single Roman home, from the cramped ground floor apartment of a poor plebeian to the sprawling villa of a senator, required light after dark. Workshops, taverns, and shops kept their doors open into the evening to conduct business. The majestic public baths, central to Roman social life, were famously open well into the night, their vast vaulted chambers requiring a warm, steady glow. Temples needed their sacred flames to burn perpetually. And then there were the streets themselves. Major thoroughfares in cities like Rome, Pompeii, and Antioch were lined with public lampstands, providing a measure of safety and security for citizens moving about after dark. This entire nocturnal economy and society ran on the humble clay lamp, and every one of those lamps thirsted for oil. The lamp itself, the lichnus or lucina, was a masterpiece of simple, efficient design. Mass-produced in pottery workshops by the millions, these small handheld vessels typically had a central filling hole, a spout for the wick, and sometimes a handle. They were cheap, disposable, and utterly essential. The wick, usually made of twisted linen or papyrus, would be threaded through the spout and soaked in the pool of oil within the lamp's body. When lit, the wick would draw the oil upward through capillary action, providing a steady, clean-burning flame that could last for hours. The light output was modest by our standards, perhaps equivalent to a small modern tea light candle. But a cluster of these lamps could brightly illuminate a room for reading, writing, or dining. The fuel for this vast network of tiny flames was overwhelmingly the lowest grade of olive oil, Oleum cibarium. Its fierce acidity and rancid flavor made it disgusting for consumption. But these qualities mattered not at all to a flame. This created a perfect and efficient economic cycle. The third pressing of the olive mash, the oil extracted from overripe or fallen fruit, the dregs skimmed from the bottom of the settling vats, all of this could be diverted to the fuel market. It was a way to monetize every single byproduct of the pressing process, ensuring that nothing from the precious olive went to waste. Merchants would acquire this low-grade oil in enormous quantities, shipping it in the same types of amphorae as fine oil, though the containers themselves were likely less carefully handled. The distribution of this fuel oil was a major industry in its own right. In every city, oil sellers operated much like modern gas stations, providing an essential public utility. Citizens would bring their empty lamps to these shops to be refilled, or purchase small ampules of oil to take home. For the wealthy, a household slave might be tasked with the daily ritual of refilling and maintaining all the lamps in the house, trimming wicks, and ensuring a constant supply of light. For the poor, the cost of even this cheap oil was a significant part of their daily budget, a necessary expense to navigate the dark streets, or to have a few extra hours of wakefulness in their cramped apartments. The collective impact of all these individual points of light was transformative. It extended the working day for artisans and scribes. It allowed for evening social gatherings, philosophical discussions, and literary recitals that defined much of elite Roman culture. It made the city streets safer and more navigable at night, fostering a sense of community and public life that extended beyond daylight hours. The famous Roman phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, speaks to what kept the populace content, but we could easily add et lucidum and the lamp. The ability to live safely and productively after dark was a fundamental pillar of Roman urban sophistication, a daily miracle made possible by the relentless, industrial-scale pressing of olives, and the countless ships that carried this humble fuel to light an empire. Even after the final pressing had squeezed out the last drops of oil, the Romans were not yet finished with the humble olive. What remained was a dry, fibrous mash known as pomace, the crushed skins, pulp and fragmented pits left behind in the woven baskets of the press. In any other society, this might have been discarded as mere waste, but to the Romans, it represented one final valuable resource to be exploited. Their genius for efficiency truly shone in how they repurposed this seemingly useless byproduct, finding innovative applications for it in everything from agriculture to industry, ensuring that every part of the harvest served a purpose. The most immediate and widespread use for pomace was as a fuel source. In a world reliant on wood-burning fires for heating, cooking, and industrial processes like pottery kilns and metal forges, a reliable and abundant alternative was incredibly valuable. Once pomace was thoroughly dried in the sun, it could be compressed into dense, brick-like cakes, or simply stored in heaps to be fed into furnaces and domestic hearths. These olive cakes burned with an intense, lasting heat, making them an excellent and inexpensive fuel for the vast bath complexes that required a constant supply of energy to heat their massive water systems and hypocauste floors. For poorer households that could not afford large stores of wood, a basket of dried pomace offered a way to keep a cooking fire going, turning the leftovers from a wealthy estate's production into a vital source of warmth and sustenance for common people. Beyond the hearth, pomace found a second life, enriching the very earth from which the olives came. Roman farmers had a sophisticated understanding of soil management, and they recognized the value of organic matter as a fertilizer. Pomace, though depleted of its oil, was still rich in organic compounds and nutrients. They would compost it, often mixing it with animal manure and other organic waste, and then spread it back onto their fields. This practice did more than just feed the soil. It improved its structure, helping sandy soils retain moisture and breaking up heavy clay soils to allow for better drainage and root growth. This created a beautiful, sustainable cycle. The waste from one harvest helped nourish the land for the next, reducing the need for external inputs and demonstrating an early form of closed-loop agriculture that maximized the productivity of their precious farmland. This practical mindset extended to the care of their animals as well. While the bitter, tannin-rich pomace was not suitable for all livestock, it could be mixed into feed for certain animals, particularly pigs and oxen. For pigs, which are naturally omnivorous and can process a wider variety of foods, the pomace provided roughage and calories. For oxen, the primary draft animals that powered Roman farms, it was a supplemental feed that helped sustain them through periods when fresh fodder was scarce. This practice transformed an industrial waste product into a component of the farm's overall food economy, reducing the cost of maintaining the vital animal labor that plowed the fields and hauled the harvest. Perhaps the most surprising and ingenious reuse of pomace, however, was in construction. The Romans were master builders, always seeking out materials that could improve the strength, durability, and insulation of their structures. They discovered that when pomace was mixed with clay and other binding agents, it created a lightweight, yet surprisingly strong, composite material. This mixture could be formed into bricks or used as a rough plaster for walls. The fibrous nature of the crushed olive bits provided excellent insulation properties, helping to regulate indoor temperatures by keeping buildings cool in the scorching Mediterranean summer and retaining warmth during the milder winters. In this final, transformative application, the physical remains of the olive harvest literally became part of the fabric of Roman towns and villas, a hidden ingredient in the walls that sheltered generations of families. This remarkable journey, from fruit to fertilizer to the very building blocks of civilization, stands as the ultimate testament to a culture that saw potential in everything and wasted nothing at all. And so we come to a crucial turning point in our story, where the production of olive oil intersects directly with the power of the Roman state. With a population of over 1 million people to feed and placate, the city of Rome was a sleeping giant that required a constant, massive influx of resources. The emperors understood that hunger and discontent among the urban plebs could quickly spiral into riots and threaten their very reign. While the grain dole, or annona, is famously known for providing bread, it was the annona civilis, the state-sponsored distribution of other essential goods, that truly completed the picture of imperial benevolence. And sitting right at the heart of this system was olive oil. Beginning with Emperor Augustus and expanding dramatically under his successors, the state took a direct, hands-on role in guaranteeing that this vital commodity remained affordable and available to the masses, transforming oil from a simple trade good into a tool of political stability and imperial control. The mechanism for this was both bureaucratic and brilliant. The emperor himself, through his appointed prefects, became the largest bulk buyer of olive oil in the entire Mediterranean. Vast fleets of ships, some directly owned by the state and others contracted from private merchants, were commissioned for one primary purpose: to transport millions of liters of oil from the fertile fields of North Africa and Spain to the warehouses of Rome. This was not a suggestion or a gentle nudge to the market. It was a colossal, state-directed procurement program that effectively set the price and availability of oil for the entire city. By purchasing such enormous quantities, the imperial administration could sell oil to the public at a subsidized, fixed price that was often far below what the free market might charge, especially during a poor harvest or a shipping crisis. This ensured that even the poorest citizen could afford to light their lamp and dress their food, fostering a sense of security and gratitude towards the emperor who provided it. Overseeing this monumental logistical feat was a special class of imperial official, the Praefectus Annoni and his network of subordinates. Think of these men not as simple clerks, but as the chief operating officers of the ancient world's largest supply chain. Their responsibilities were immense. They had to forecast the city's annual consumption, negotiate contracts with major producers across the provinces, coordinate the arrival of hundreds of ships into the crowded port of Ostia, and manage the massive storage facilities where the oil was held before distribution. But their role went beyond mere logistics. They were also quality control inspectors. It was their job to ensure that the oil being offloaded from the ships and poured into the state's dolia was of acceptable quality for public consumption. They would have teams of tasters and inspectors sampling from random amphorae in a shipment, checking for signs of rancidity or adulteration. An official who allowed spoiled or substandard oil to enter the public distribution system was failing in his most basic duty to both the emperor and the people. This system reached its absolute zenith under Emperor Septimius Severus in the early 3rd century. Recognizing that oil had become just as critical to public order as grain, Severus instituted the Oleum Publicum, a formal regular dole of free oil for the registered citizens of Rome. This was a masterstroke of populist policy. On designated days, citizens would present their tokens at distribution points and receive a ration of high-quality oil, paid for directly from the imperial treasury. The political message was unmistakable. The emperor was not just your ruler, he was your personal benefactor, the guarantor of your comfort and well-being. The warehouses that held this oil, the Horia Olaria, became some of the most secure and important buildings in the city, their contents literally synonymous with the stability of the regime itself. In this way, the flow of olive oil was successfully channeled and controlled, transforming a natural agricultural product into a powerful instrument of peace, propaganda, and unparalleled imperial power. The evolution of the Roman olive press is a story of relentless innovation, a centuries-long journey where brute force was gradually refined into precise, controlled power. While the basic lever press, the prelum, was effective, its limitations were clear from the start. Relying on massive stone counterweights or the sheer muscle of workers hauling on ropes was not only dangerous and labor-intensive, but it also lacked fine control. Applying too much pressure too quickly could shatter the press baskets, or even the wooden beam itself, while inconsistent pressure meant valuable oil was left behind in the paste. The Romans, being master engineers, were never content with good enough. They observed these inefficiencies and set about systematically improving the design, driven by a constant desire to maximize yield, improve safety, and streamline the entire production process. The first major leap forward was the integration of a simple but powerful mechanism, the windlass. This was a wooden cylinder mounted horizontally at the free end of the press beam, equipped with ropes or chains that were attached to a fixed point on the ground or the press base. Instead of workers hanging precariously from the beam or heaving on ropes, they could now turn the windlass using long poles, effectively winding the rope around the cylinder to mechanically pull the beam downward. This provided a much more controlled and powerful application of force than human weight alone. The windlass offered a significant mechanical advantage, allowing a smaller team to generate pressures that previously required a large group of laborers. It was a crucial intermediate step that demonstrated the Romans' growing understanding of leverage and force multiplication, setting the stage for the revolutionary invention that would truly transform olive pressing. That revolutionary invention was the screw press, a piece of technology so effective that its fundamental principle would remain in use for over 1,000 years. The integration of the screw into the lever press mechanism represented the absolute pinnacle of Roman pressing technology. The design was elegantly simple, yet devastatingly effective. A large, sturdy wooden screw was mounted vertically through the free end of the overhead press beam. The bottom of this screw was fixed to a large wooden block that sat directly on top of the stack of press baskets filled with olive paste. To operate it, workers would insert long wooden poles into holes on the head of the screw and walk in a circle, turning it. As the screw turned, it drove the wooden block downward, exerting a massive, gradual, and incredibly controlled pressure onto the baskets below. The advantages of the screw press over its predecessors cannot be overstated. First and foremost was control. The operator could apply pressure in minute, precise increments, slowly increasing the force to ensure a complete extraction of oil without the risk of bursting the baskets or contaminating the oil with excessive pit fragmentation. This careful, methodical pressing was essential for producing the highest grades of oil. Second was sheer power. The mechanical advantage provided by the screw was immense, allowing for pressures far greater than any counterweight or windlass system could achieve consistently. This meant a much higher yield of oil from the same amount of olive paste, directly boosting the profitability of every harvest. Finally, there was the matter of safety and space. The screw press was a more compact and stable unit. It eliminated the need for dangerously heavy overhead counterweights that could fall and cause injury or damage, and it required less physical space to operate, making press room layouts more efficient. This technological progression wasn't just about building better machines. It was about a deeper, more scientific understanding of the material they were working with. Roman engineers and farmers came to realize that the quality and quantity of oil extracted were deeply affected by the temperature and preparation of the paste. In response, they developed the torcularium, a dedicated press room that was often partially sunken into the ground or built with thick stone walls to maintain a consistently cool temperature, which helped preserve the oil's delicate flavors. Some larger operations even incorporated a heated table called a furnace or a calum. Before the final pressing, the olive paste would be gently warmed on this heated surface. This mild application of heat made the oil more fluid and less viscous, allowing it to flow out of the paste more freely and completely during pressing, thereby increasing the overall yield. This careful manipulation of temperature shows an advanced, almost modern grasp of food science, demonstrating that Roman oil production was a blend of brute mechanical force and nuanced, delicate control. The press had evolved from a simple tool of compression into a sophisticated instrument of extraction, a symbol of how Roman ingenuity turned a simple agricultural task into a high-value industrial art. While the techniques of cultivation and pressing provided the foundation, the character of Roman olive oil was ultimately shaped by the land itself. Just as today's wine connoisseurs speak of terroir, the unique combination of soil, climate, and topography that gives a wine its distinctive personality, the Romans developed a sophisticated appreciation for the regional identities of their oils. The empire's vast expanse contained a mosaic of microclimates perfect for olive cultivation. And from these diverse landscapes emerged oils with wildly different reputations, flavors, and best uses. The most famous producing regions became household names, their products instantly recognizable to any discerning Roman consumer, and their output was so colossal that it fundamentally shaped the economy of the entire Mediterranean. The undisputed heavyweight champion of Roman oil production, the region that truly industrialized the trade, was the province of Baetica in southern Spain, in the area we know today as Andalusia. This sun-drenched, rolling landscape, with its perfect combination of hot days, cool nights, and well-drained soils, was the olive oil factory of the empire. The scale of production here was simply staggering, centered around the mighty Guadalquivir River Valley and the bustling port city of Hispalis, modern-day Seville. It was Baetican oil, shipped in its millions of distinctive trestle 20 amphorae, that primarily fed the insatiable appetite of the city of Rome and its legions. The oil from this region was known for its reliability and robust character. It was typically a golden yellow oil, pressed from fully ripe olives, yielding a high quantity of product that was flavorful, though perhaps not possessing the most complex or delicate aroma. This was the workhorse oil, the common oleum virid that filled the lamps and cooking pots of the empire. Its very ubiquity, a testament to the region's agricultural might. The Monte Testaccio in Rome is built overwhelmingly from the shattered remains of Beetican amphorae, a silent, crumbling monument to the province's overwhelming dominance in bulk production. If Baetica was the industrial heartland, the province of Africa Proconsualaris, in modern-day Tunisia and Libya, was its fierce competitor and the other great pillar of the imperial supply. The hinterlands of cities like Leptis Magna were a sea of olive groves, and the oil they produced was held in exceptionally high regard. African oil often carried a premium reputation, frequently considered superior to its Spanish counterpart in both flavor and quality. It was renowned for its greenish hue, a sign that it was made from olives harvested earlier in the season, and it was prized for its fruitier, more pungent and complex flavor profile. This made African oil a favorite for higher-end culinary uses, and likely a larger component of the oil distributed in the state Annona. The success of North African oil was also a story of environmental adaptation and Roman engineering. The cultivation of olives on such a massive scale in a drier climate was made possible by sophisticated irrigation systems and water conservation techniques that turned arid landscapes into immensely productive farmland. The rivalry between Beetican and African oil producers would have been a major feature of the ancient oil market, with merchants and consumers debating the merits of each, much like a sommelier might compare a bold Spanish wine with a refined French vintage. For the ultimate connoisseur, however, the most sought-after and exclusive oils came not from these vast production powerhouses, but from smaller, specialized regions famed for their unique and exquisite products. The coastal peninsula of Istria, in the northern Adriatic, produced what was widely considered the finest, most luxurious olive oil in the entire Roman world. Istrian oil was the oleum ex albis ulivis par excellence, a premier first-pressing oil that commanded astronomical prices. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder sang its praises, noting its distinctive pale, almost white color, which is how it got its name, and its exceptionally mild, sweet, and almost nutty flavor, devoid of the bitterness common in other oils. This unique quality was attributed to a specific local olive variety and the particular coastal climate, which allowed the fruit to mature slowly and develop its delicate characteristics. Istrian oil was not for lighting lamps or cooking stews. It was a finishing oil, drizzled raw over the most delicate dishes at the tables of the elite, or used as a lavish gift to signify immense wealth and status. Its rarity and expense made it the ultimate symbol of gourmet luxury. Other regions carved out their own respected niches. Greece, with its ancient olive growing traditions, continued to produce highly valued oils, particularly from Attica and the area around Athens, the very birthplace of the sacred tree. The island of Venafrum in Italy was also famous, its oil noted for its excellent keeping qualities and pleasant aroma. This regional specialization was so advanced that a knowledgeable Roman shopper, much like a modern foodie seeking out a single origin coffee or chocolate, would actively seek out oil from a specific province or even a particular estate, knowing it would deliver a consistent and expected flavor experience. The amphora itself acted as a guarantee of origin. The shape of a Dressel 20 screamed Baetica, while a different form might signal the prized contents of an Istrian vessel. This intricate geographic tapestry, woven from thousands of individual farms and estates, ensured that the Roman world was not just awash in a generic commodity, but was instead enriched by a vibrant and diverse marketplace of flavors, each bottle telling a story of the sun, soil, and people of its distant homeland. In the stratified world of ancient Rome, the olive oil on your table was far more than a condiment. It was a silent, potent declaration of who you were. The grade of oil you could afford and serve was one of the most immediate and recognizable indicators of your place in the social hierarchy. A liquid measure of your wealth, taste, and connections. This distinction was played out most dramatically in the context of the elite Roman banquet, the cena, which was as much a theater of social power as it was a meal. A host's prestige was judged not just by the exotic delicacies on offer, dormice glazed in honey, roast flamingo, or mussels from a distant shore, but by the quality of the oil that dressed them. Serving the finest oleum ex albis ulivis from a prized estate in Istria was a calculated act of display, a way to communicate refinement and access to the most exclusive goods money could buy. Guests would have immediately recognized the pale gold color and the delicate, peppery finish of such an oil, understanding that their host had spared no expense to procure it. This was an oil meant to be tasted and savored on its own, drizzled over a freshly shucked oyster or a piece of warm bread, its complex aroma becoming a topic of conversation in itself, a sensory testament to the host's impeccable taste and vast resources. For the vast majority of Romans, however, such luxuries were utterly unimaginable. The common citizen, the shopkeeper, or the legionary veteran living on a small plot of land relied on oleum virid or even ciberium for their daily sustenance. This was not an oil for savoring. It was a functional ingredient, a source of calories and a medium for cooking. In a cramped street-side apartment, the smell of common oil heating in a pan would have been a constant feature of daily life, used to fry a simple pancake of spelt flour or to saute the day's vegetables. Its stronger, more robust flavor, and sometimes its darker color, were simply accepted characteristics of an everyday necessity. The social divide was so pronounced that it extended beyond the kitchen and into the very light that filled their homes. While a wealthy senator's villa would be illuminated by the clean, bright flame of fine-quality lamp oil, a poorer household would make do with the smoky, pungent glow of rancid ciberium, the smell of which would permeate their clothes and living space, creating yet another sensory marker of their lower status. The quality of light, the aroma in the air, and the taste on the tongue were all constant, subtle reminders of the vast gulf between the privileged few and the multitude. This connection between oil and status was further reinforced by the practice of gift-giving, a crucial lubricant of Roman social and political relationships. A finely crafted glass unguentarium filled with rare, aged oil from a famous estate was a present of considerable significance, offered to curry favor with a patron, to seal a business deal, or to honor a guest. The Roman poet Martial, in one of his many epigrams, even jokes about a wealthy but stingy man who, when inviting guests to dinner, would boast about serving expensive oil from Venafrum, but would actually secretly use a cheaper substitute, only bringing out the good bottle for a taste right at the end of the meal to create a false impression of his generosity. This anecdote highlights just how powerful the symbolic weight of a luxury oil had become. Merely being seen to possess, it was almost as important as actually consuming it. In a society obsessed with public image and social climbing, the choice of olive oil became a nuanced language, a way to flaunt one's success, to show respect, or, as in the case of Martial's miser, to deceive. From the highest echelons of power to the most humble household, The substance that powered the empire also meticulously mapped its intricate social landscape, one carefully measured pore at a time. This immense empire-wide demand for olive oil inevitably reshaped the very face of the Mediterranean world, carving out a new agricultural landscape that was both a testament to human ingenuity and a stark lesson in the environmental costs of intensive production. To feed the relentless appetite of Rome's presses, farmers and estate owners undertook monumental projects to transform marginal lands into highly productive olive groves, employing sophisticated techniques that we would today recognize as remarkably sustainable. The most visible and enduring of these alterations was the construction of vast terracing systems on countless hillsides across Italy, North Africa, and Spain. Instead of clearing forests on flat, fertile plains that were better suited for grain, Roman agriculturists looked to the rocky, sun-drenched slopes, seeing potential where others saw only difficulty. With painstaking labor, they carved a series of level steps into the hillsides, each one supported by a retaining wall of dry, stacked stone. These terraces performed a multitude of crucial functions. They created flat, stable planting beds for the olive tree's root systems. They drastically reduced soil erosion by preventing precious topsoil from being washed away by winter rains. And they maximized the capture of every drop of rainwater, allowing it to percolate slowly into the ground rather than running off immediately. Walking through these regions today, you can still see the ghostly outlines of these ancient terraces, their silent stone walls standing for centuries as a monument to a long-vanished agricultural order, a deliberate and careful sculpting of the land for a single, vital purpose. Managing water in the often arid Mediterranean climate was the next great challenge, and here too the Romans demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of hydrology. While the olive tree is famously drought-resistant, a reliable water source was still essential for establishing young trees and for ensuring a good fruit set in the years leading up to a harvest. On large estates, this meant investing in complex irrigation systems that could transport water over long distances. They built aqueducts and canals to bring water from mountain springs, but their most ingenious and sustainable solutions were often more localized. They constructed intricate networks of cisterns to capture and store winter rainfall, and they mastered the art of building qanats, gentle, underground slanting tunnels that tapped into groundwater aquifers and used gravity to deliver a steady, reliable flow of water to the groves without losing a precious drop to evaporation under the hot sun. This careful husbanding of water resources allowed them to push olive cultivation into regions that would otherwise have been too dry, creating a verdant, productive belt of agriculture that followed the logic of empire rather than the limitations of nature. The most profound environmental impact, however, was the creation of these massive, specialized agricultural regions. In places like Baetica in Spain and the hinterlands of Leptis Magna in North Africa, the landscape was systematically and almost completely transformed into a monoculture of olive groves. Thousands of square miles of native ecosystems, forests of oak and pine, scrubland and natural grassland, were cleared to make way for endless, orderly rows of olive trees. This represented a staggering loss of biodiversity. The complex web of native plants, insects, and animals that had thrived in these diverse habitats was replaced by a single domesticated species. The long-term consequences for local soil health were also significant. While the olive tree is not as nutrient-hungry as other crops, the continual harvesting and removal of its fruit, year after year and century after century, meant that essential minerals like phosphorus and potassium were steadily being stripped from the soil and shipped across the sea to Rome, never to be returned. This slow mining of the land's fertility was an unavoidable cost of such a centralized, extractive economic model. Yet in a fascinating paradox, this very same system also fostered some of the ancient world's most advanced practices in sustainable soil management. Roman farmers were keen observers of their land, and they developed practical, effective methods to combat this depletion. The most important of these was the use of pomace, the dry, leftover mash from the presses, as a fertilizer. Instead of discarding this waste product, they composted it and spread it back onto the terraces, returning organic matter and nutrients directly to the groves. They also practiced intercropping, planting nitrogen-fixing legumes like beans, lentils, and chickpeas between the young trees. These plants helped to restore nitrogen to the soil, provided a secondary food crop for the estate's workers, and offered a ground cover that further prevented erosion. Some larger estates even practiced a form of integrated agriculture, keeping flocks of sheep or goats to graze on the vegetation between the trees. The animals would naturally fertilize the soil with their manure, while also providing wool, milk, and meat. This created a remarkably resilient and closed-loop system, where the waste from one process became the fuel for another, minimizing external inputs and maximizing the productivity of the land for generations. The story of Roman olive oil's environmental impact is therefore not a simple tale of exploitation, but a complex legacy of both profound alteration and ingenious adaptation, showing a society that was capable of both transforming a continent and understanding the delicate balance required to maintain its bounty. Standing in a state-of-the-art, modern frantoio, the hum of centrifugal stainless steel machines seems a world away from the groaning wooden beams and stone mills of a Roman press. Yet, if you look closely, the ghost of ancient ingenuity is everywhere. The fundamental goal remains identical: to coax oil from the olive while preserving its delicate flavors and preventing bitterness. The Romans achieved this through brilliant mechanical precision, like the precisely curved millstones of the trapetum that crushed the fruit without shattering the bitter pits. Today, we use stainless steel hammer mills and blade crushers to achieve that same initial paste. But the principle of controlled fragmentation is a direct descendant of that ancient wisdom. Even the modern malaxation machine, which slowly churns the olive paste to allow tiny oil droplets to coalesce, is a high-tech echo of the Roman understanding that time and gentle warmth were essential before the final press. Perhaps the most significant divergence is one of philosophy and scale. For the Romans, the entire process was a seasonal, community-driven race against time, lasting only a few frantic weeks. The modern global market demands year-round production, achieved by shipping olives from opposite hemispheres. Roman quality was judged by the senses sight, smell, and taste, guided by generations of experience. Today, that sensory analysis is supplemented by scientific precision. Chemical tests for free fatty acidity and peroxide values provide an objective measure of quality that would have amazed a Roman Olarius, giving us the strict legal definitions of extra virgin we use today. The modern obsession with cold pressing is itself a nod to antiquity, a promise that the oil was extracted without excessive heat that degrades flavor, a problem the Romans mitigated by building their press rooms partially underground to stay cool. Yet, in a beautiful twist of fate, some of the most modern and sought-after artisanal practices are, in fact, the conscious revival of ancient methods. The entire stone mill movement, where producers proudly label their oil as being crushed by traditional granite wheels, is a direct return to the Roman trapetum. These producers argue that the slower, gentler crushing action of stone generates less heat and creates a more flavorful, complex paste than high-speed metal crushers, a quality over quantity approach that would be deeply familiar to a Roman estate owner producing oleum ex albis ulivis. Furthermore, the resurgence of using natural fiber mats in presses, just like the Roman esparto grass baskets, instead of synthetic materials, is praised for allowing the oil to breathe during extraction. Another intuitive practice now validated by modern palettes. This revival has been profoundly informed by archaeology. Experimental projects across the Mediterranean have reconstructed full-scale Roman presses, allowing experts to actually produce oil using 2,000-year-old technology. The results have been revelatory. By pressing olives using these reconstructed tools, researchers have discovered that the Romans could achieve astonishingly high yields, often rivaling those of modern mechanical presses. More importantly, tasting the resulting oil has provided a tangible, delicious link to the past. The oil produced often has a distinct, robust, and incredibly fresh character, with a peppery kick that defines high-quality, early harvest oil. This has not just been an academic exercise. It has directly influenced a new generation of producers who are blending ancient wisdom with modern hygiene standards to create oils that are both authentically old and brilliantly new, proving that the quest for perfect liquid gold is a timeless pursuit. Reflecting on this entire incredible journey, from the sacred grove to the sacred flame, it becomes clear that the story of Roman olive oil is far more than a footnote in agricultural history. It is in many ways the story of Rome itself. The level of sophistication they achieved was staggering, a perfect synthesis of brute force and delicate precision, of deep tradition and relentless innovation. They took a simple Mediterranean fruit and built an entire civilization upon it, creating systems of production, transportation, and distribution so advanced that they would not be rivaled in Europe for over 1,000 years after the empire's fall. This was not a haphazard operation. It was a meticulously engineered machine, powered by a combination of slave labor, imperial ambition, and a profound understanding of both nature and mechanics. What is perhaps most remarkable is how this single commodity managed to permeate every single layer of Roman existence, binding the spiritual to the mundane in a way few other substances ever have. It was there at the moment of birth, used to anoint a newborn, and it was there at the moment of death, poured as a final offering to guide the soul. It lit the darkest nights, healed the sick, cleansed the body, and defined the very taste of their cuisine. It separated the senator from the slave, not just by the quality on their plate, but by the very light that filled their homes and the scent that clung to their skin. Olive oil was the invisible infrastructure of daily life, the unsung engine of the economy, and a tangible link to the divine, all contained within a simple clay amphora. The archaeological legacy this industry left behind continues to speak to us, offering a uniquely vivid window into the ancient world. Monte Testaccio is not merely a pile of broken pots. It is a sprawling, mountainous archive, its countless sherds inscribed with the meticulous records of a globalized economy. Each fragment tells a story of a merchant in Spain, a potter in a busy workshop, a ship captain braving the treacherous sea, and a customs official in Austria checking his lists. Through these broken pieces, we can trace supply routes, calculate consumption with astonishing accuracy, and watch the economic fortunes of entire regions rise and fall. The presses unearthed at sites like Volubilis in North Africa or in the Italian countryside are not silent ruins. They are frozen moments of intense activity, allowing us to reconstruct the entire process, from the braying of the donkey turning the mill to the final drip of golden oil into a waiting vat. This often overlooked aspect of Roman ingenuity invites us to reconsider what true innovation looks like. We tend to marvel at their aqueducts, their roads, and their monumental architecture, and rightly so. But sometimes the most profound brilliance lies in solving the humble, essential problems of everyday life on a colossal scale. The Romans looked at an olive tree and saw not just food, but fuel, medicine, currency, and light. They engineered a system to harness it, to refine it, to transport it across thousands of miles of open water, and to distribute it to a city of 1 million people with breathtaking regularity. They built an empire not just on the strength of their legions, but on the richness of their olive oil. So the next time you enjoy that drizzle of gold on a salad or dip a piece of bread into a small dish, take a moment to think about the astonishing journey of this humble liquid, and the ancient ingenious civilization that first mastered its power to illuminate the world.